you.
Ms. Romanowski, we thank you. Let me ask you a question, because you see the press reports on the Egyptian government's move in the wrong direction with respect to economic reform, harassment of street vendors, the price controls on the street vendors, undoing the privatizations undertaken by the Morsi government, which was no friend to start with for economic liberalization. But you just don't see anything to try to take the informal sector of the economy and make it formal. And I suspect that all our efforts, including enterprise funds, are going to be wasted if it goes to defending the economic status quo in Egypt. If we don't undertake the kind of transformation of the economy that will allow entrepreneurs, the small entrepreneur, the vendor, to operate, to start businesses, if they don't have access to property rights, I don't think you're going to have anything except in Egypt that works for a few Egyptians. And I guess the question is, why should we give economic aid in that kind of an environment? What are we doing?
Mr. Chairman, we have spent a good part of the last 2 years in reorienting much of our economic assistance to ensure that we have an opportunity to get to the private sector and to get to small and medium entrepreneurs. It is an area where we continue to believe that if you engage and demonstrate some best practices and some ways of supporting the small and medium entrepreneurs, that we ultimately will be successful.
I think ultimately what you do is, if you end up just throwing the money into the enterprise funds and not undertaking or walking the Egyptians through the reforms that will allow people to start businesses, if the fundamentals aren't there, that money is not going to end up transferring people into the formal economy. Whereas if you do what we've long known needs to be done, it might not be easy. It might mean you'd really have to lean on the powers in Egypt. But I think you could make a lot of progress. We had a hearing here where we had Madeleine Albright, we had Hernando de Soto. We went through a lot of these issues, and instead we're right back to the enterprise fund concept of how you're going to dole out money. I'm very disappointed with the lack of a more fundamental approach at looking how to reform the economy, because I think it's something that we could really do in a bipartisan way and help Egypt. But I'm going to go to Mr. Cholet and ask him, you mentioned our shared interest in counterterrorism. What is the administration doing to support the Egyptian military's effort in the Sinai, because that's really slipped out of government control ever since Mubarak's ouster? How does the administration's suspension of military aid impact the Egyptian military's ability to secure the peninsula?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. The Sinai has been something we've talked with the Egyptians about over the past several years. And a year ago, if we were having this hearing, we would be talking about frustrations with their lack of action in Sinai. And over the past several months, they've been taking significant action in Sinai, some of the most significant operations there we've seen in many, many years in terms of dealing with the extremist threat. So that's a good thing.
So you're working with the Egyptians to better tailor their efforts to counterterrorism in the Sinai?
Well, we encourage them. These are their own operations. We're not working in cooperation with them in an operational way at all. But we stay in very close touch with them, as do the Israelis, on their operations in the Sinai, because there are certain treaty restrictions that they have about the kinds of capabilities they can deploy to the peninsula under the Camp David Treaty. The assistance that we are holding, the M1A1 tank kits, the F-16s, the Harpoon missiles, even the Apaches, is not affecting their operational effectiveness in the Sinai at all. Those operations have been ongoing for several months, and they have sufficient capability to take care of that problem. We do encourage them to do more, and we stay in very close touch with them on their operations and in terms of any particular needs.
Thank you. Let me quickly go to Ambassador Jones for my last question. That was the concern about the Coptic Christian community that I raised in Upper Egypt, especially where many of Egypt's Islamists have been active. You've got close to 100 churches that have been burned there over the summer. And across Egypt, you have a lot of Christian-owned homes, businesses that have been vandalized or destroyed. How can we do more to ensure that that minority, the Coptic minority, and other minorities are protected in Egypt?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question. It's a very important issue for the United States. It's an important element of our constant conversation with the Egyptian government. We have strongly condemned the attacks on Coptic churches and on Copts, and we have called on the Egyptian government to bring those responsible for these what we consider heinous acts of terror, to bring them to justice. The Egyptian government has also condemned these attacks. But to answer your broader question, the protection of minorities, Christian minorities, as well as any other minority, is a very important element of our ongoing conversation with the Egyptian leadership about what a democracy actually involves. It does involve, as far as we're concerned, and this is something that we advocate strongly to the Egyptian government, it involves protection of minorities, as well as protections, the whole list of protections that we've already talked about. This is something that we will continue to have a spirited conversation with the Egyptian leadership about, to ensure that they recognize the importance of protecting their Christian minorities, as well as assuring the rights of women, protection of the rule of law, protection of other human rights, protection of the press, protection of assembly.
Thanks, Ambassador. We'll go to Mr. Elliot Engel of New York.